So let's talk a little bit more about specifications and standards. All right, so here's the look from the inside of a balcony, waterproofed in there. Here's the open edge. All right, here's a look from the other side. All right, so just because that's where your tiles finish doesn't mean that that's also where the membrane finishes. All right, because again, water will get into there, migrate underneath there, and blow that membrane off, or it'll just go straight through and underneath. All right. So the reason was, well, we're going to stick tiles onto there, so you know, we didn't know if you had a membrane that can do. We didn't want to change membranes. All right. You don't have to. There's plenty of membranes on the market that are suitable for direct sticking tiles, and they're also UV stable. Taken this membrane all the way through, tiled on there, left it exposed there. Yes, mate?
What happens with those penetrations of those fixings in the balustrade?
Yeah, that was the next point. It was like it was set up. All right, yes, the penetrations are also rubbish. All right, so
what about jointing of the membranes as well?
Jointing of the membranes?
Join the two membranes together.
Yeah. Okay, can I deal with the penetrations and then I'll come back to you? All right. So the best way of doing the balustrade penetrations is actually to have the fixings in place before the waterproofer gets there, if that's possible. All right. Then you can lap the membrane onto the fixings and go through. These ones here, technically, if they drill the holes and fill all the drill holes up with a sealant, it actually meets the requirements of the standard. Is it a good idea? Absolutely not. All right. So penetrations there. The other thing, really, if you can, I'd actually fix the balustrade on the vertical face. All right. So then you've got no penetration through the top of the horizontal part of the membrane. That's the best place. Obviously, it couldn't be done there. All right. The other thing, core a hole into the concrete. All right. So what you do then is you lap your membrane down into the core hole and you fix your posts with epoxy. All right, because epoxy is impervious, but you've got to remember, you've got to take the epoxy all the way up to the very top of the core hole, preferably 5mm higher at the post, chamfered out. All right, that's the best way of doing that. So you've got to be a little bit careful, all right, because epoxies during the curing process actually get quite hot if you don't use the right product. So it can potentially actually melt the membrane. And so again, you've got to get the right product. The lapping of membranes, right? If you want to put one membrane to the other, they've got to be the same membrane to start with, right? And I'll show you a couple of pictures later on. But you need at least 100mm overlap for liquids. Right, of good membrane, clean membrane to lap a new membrane onto. Is that what you were trying to get at? All right, so you need 100mm. So even if you're doing a repair and you're taking a cracked tile out, you need to expose 100mm of the existing membrane to lap a repair membrane onto. Right? And you've got to find out what that membrane was to make sure the new membrane is compatible with it. Make sense? So, talking about lapping membranes and different products, right? So, what you don't do is when you're 3/4 of the way through a deck and you run out, you don't go out to the car and pick up a bucket or something just because so you can finish that afternoon. All right? So, and it gets even worse on this job because all the transitions were done probably 6 weeks ago with the dark green membrane. Then the rest of the deck was done with the blue membrane, and then it was finished with the green membrane. All right. Now I've got to point out here, right, that there is products on the market where exactly the same membrane comes in 2 different colours. All right. That's okay. All right. As long as the name on the side of the bucket's the same, whatever the name blue, whatever the name green, they're compatible. All right. I can tell you these are not. Because the green one happens to be a class 2 membrane. The blue one is a class 3 membrane, and the chemistry of the membranes is also not compatible. All right, so you should never ever do that. All right, nearly at the end, let's talk a little bit more in detail about planter boxes. So what the standard says, the membrane shall be sealed to the drainage outlet and it shall extend vertically to a height of 100 millimetres above the soil fill level. Falls in the base of the planter box shall be in accordance with clause 2.5.2. So anyone remember what the clause was about falls? Yeah, a bit more than that. Falls shall be in a structural substrate or formed by a screed. So again, if you've got a flat planter box floor, create the falls first before the whole membrane system goes in. Here's the nodes that no one ever reads. First couple aren't all that important. You've got to have an overflow. You should have protection boards to make sure that plant roots don't affect the membrane. You should consider mulch when determining the soil fill level. Here's the important bit. Externally exposed walls of planter boxes should be waterproofed to prevent failure of the internal planter box membrane. Okay? So what that clause means is, here's a planter box. This wall here, if that's exposed to the weather, membrane should actually continue all the way up across, and you should waterproof the outside face to prevent water from blowing off the inside membrane. All right? And I know the renderers generally have a whinge, but there's plenty of products on the market that allow you to key a render product to a membrane. It's not a problem. All right? The other reason why you should do, as an absolute minimum, come across to the very top and across the top, is after you handed the job over, how do you know what the owners are going to do with the soil fill level? All right? And in this case, the membrane finishes here. And it's highly unlikely that's going to be anywhere near the intended soil fill level before it's handed over. All right, so come up the entire inside face, and at the very least across the top. If the membrane, that wall is exposed to the weather, waterproof that side as well. All right. So last time I had a very good question. What happens if that's face brick? All right. Then what you need to do is use a membrane inside which can handle negative hydrostatic pressure. All right, so there's a few products on the market that can do that, no problem. All right, but if it's rendered, no reason why you wouldn't go over the top. Make sense? All right, overlaying surface finishings. So for bonded systems where the topping or bedding mortar is to be bonded to the membrane, sufficient movement joints shall be provided in the topping or bedding mortar to accommodate movement over the membrane. Right, and if you think back to that rooftop earlier, that's what I was getting at. You need to have movement control joints in the screed. What I forgot to say, I generally get asked, how do I bond a screed to a waterproofing membrane? Well, it's quite easy. Use a tile adhesive. And decent quality tile adhesive, preferably not one with bits of rubber in it. Spread it out with a 6mm or 8mm notch trowel, and while that glue's still wet, dump your screed material into it. It is not going to let go. And ideally movement joints, minimum width of 10mm are installed at 4.5 m intervals. And like I said, movement joints must carry through the entire tiling system. So here's an example, CFC deck. Got a few cracks in the tiles, and when you have a closer look, they're pretty much exactly where those joins are. All right. And again, CFC deck, you have to stack the sheets also, even with the old heavy board. All right. Because it's actually quite difficult for the tiler. Well, not difficult, I suppose you can cut the tiles, but from a set out point of view, if these sheets are offset, the movement joints in the tile system are going to be here, there and everywhere. If you stack the sheets, you get nice straight lines and you can arrange your tile set out to suit it all. Unbonded or partially bonded, so where the topping or bedding mortar is structurally sufficient not to require bonding, a double slip sheet shall be laid over the membrane to separate it from the screed. So the standard, like I said, calls for a double layer strip sheet if you're going to do an unbonded screed system. And a structural unbonded screed should be a minimum thickness of 50 millimetres with lightweight mesh reinforcing. Right? So you remember earlier that the CFC board manufacturer say minimum 40 mil screed, standard wants minimum 50 millimetres. So guess what wins the argument? All right? And it says minimum, right? So if you're doing an unbonded screed on a deck, it's 50 millimetres at the front, and then it just goes thicker towards the house. So a 3 metre deck will be 50 mil at the front, 80 mil at the house as a minimum. And then membrane on top. And for unbonded systems, you'd have to consider putting in additional movement joints if you need them. Right, for smaller decks, quite often, just AbleFlex around the outside of the screed's enough. All right, for bigger decks, you have to think about additional movement joints. All right, final clause in the standard. Inspection or acceptance test. So unlike the internal standard, the external waterproofing standard actually requires some testing to be done before anything else happens. So what the standard says, on completion of the installation, the membrane system inspection and or acceptance testing shall be conducted. All right, so it says shall, so it's a requirement. A visual inspection should be carried out and or one of the following test procedures undertaken. So for a liquid membrane system, the dry film thickness to be tested by non-destructive means, and you saw examples of that earlier with the machine that had the readouts, 233 and 1000, so that's how you do that. The alternative is a controlled water test to be conducted for a minimum duration of 24 hours. Right. And I'm yet to work out how you do a 24-hour water test on a deck with 3 open sides. Right. So you're kind of stuck with that. Right. Visual inspection and dry film thickness test.